Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, Season 3. Let's watch.
Guys talked since then, been out since then, hooked up since then.
But yes. Yeah.
So are y'all dating right now?
Yeah.
Look at that! We split them up on the couch.
Interesting. I'm surprised by that. Maybe all my conspiracy-mindedness is wrong. Because I thought that she had made an early determination that she didn't really want to be with him. She didn't hate him. She thought he was a good person, but just didn't feel the spark. But interesting that they're dating now. Huh. That really throws everything off for me. I have to re-narrativize everything that I saw. So that second half of the season where they were bonding seems like that might have been real. I don't know what's wrong with me. When I was watching it, I didn't react to it because I just thought, I don't know. This looks a little fabricated. I mean, I guess it still could have been, but I don't have any reason to believe that's true, actually, because now they're dating. So, I don't know. But I'm really happy for the two of them. I mean, that's nice. I often think about that for all these individuals. The smart thing that they should all do if they're unsure is to say, look, let's just say no on the altar and let's just date. Because, there's a chance that you and I are going to work out, and let's not blow it on having to make a choice 2 months after meeting you. So let's see what happens. So good for them. Good for them.
I'm right here.
Oh my God. I was like, stay out of my man's DMs.
Yep.
Like, oh my God. I see y'all, ladies.
You bring out a side of Raven that like a lot of people don't get to see, because I love my girl, but she's a tough shell to crack.
Tell me about it.
But when you do,
Yeah, she even talked about that. So interesting that for her, this process really helped her. That's interesting. Because she and Bartice talked similarly, but it seems that for Raven, she was able to see it through or to change and to open up her mind. Bartice was not. I don't blame Bartice for not falling in love with someone or for falling out of love with someone. It happens. But I don't know, maybe it's a value that we have, and this show is trying to get at that love can be blind, it should be blind, that emotional connection is more important than physical attractiveness, right? And it just depends on how you look at it. It depends on what you value. It depends on how you want to live your life. But at the very least, I guess I would say, and I've been indoctrinated into American culture, so I hold that value, that emotional connection is important, obviously. So for Raven, she was able to push past that, push past the part of her that's like, he's not the sort of guy I would date in the real world. But we did have a connection, and it's interesting because, they weren't physical in the beginning, or they weren't physical much in the beginning. I don't know. It really did look doomed in the beginning. So what do I know? And I've said this before, but I'll briefly say that I learned in my early career as a couples therapist that I have no idea. I thought I knew, but I learned I did not know anything about whether or not people will stay together or not. I will see relationships that seem from the outside to just be complete disasters that no one would mistake for a good relationship or a relationship worth fighting for, and those people will stay together. And then I'll see another relationship where I'm like, you two are the most sensitive, open, nice, compassionate, good communicators I've ever met. And then they get divorced. So it's a very personal choice. And what do I know? So for the two of them in the beginning, it was a little rocky, a little like, I don't know what's going on here. We're not having a huge connection. So let's see what happens. And maybe, and I hypothesized a little bit along these lines, that for the two of them, I think, particularly for her, she would talk about how she would put up walls, which when people are stressed out, they'll just kind of slow down and will protect themselves. And as long as they don't go too far with that, meaning they're not completely pushing the other person away, what that can kind of do is it will slow things down. It will lower the likelihood of conflict. It'll cool things off, and that can be obviously a death knell for an early stage of a relationship. But it could have given them, the two of them, time to warm up to each other, to learn each other's vibes and to start to like each other in that way. Whereas other individuals like Bartice, who didn't feel it with Nancy, but Bartice just kept talking and saying things, which I think alienated Nancy naturally. Well, I don't know if that's exactly true. Anyway, well, Cole is probably a better example, right? If Cole had, let's say Cole was more like Raven, and Cole wakes up that, first few days and it's just like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it, but I don't know. So I'm just going to kind of slow down and just go through the motions and kind of survive. And I'm not going to do anything hostile. I'm not going to reveal anything. Because that could be another thing, is like, if Raven was more like Bartice and Cole, she might have said something more strong. She might have been thinking it, but because she tends to distance and slow down, she was more reserved, is a better word. She didn't say things along those lines. Who knows if she had those feelings? But it's possible that Raven, upon seeing him in the flesh, of course he's an attractive guy, but they're all attractive people. But point is that Raven at first was like, oh, he's not really the sort of person, or I'm not feeling it, as I can't remember. And so there's a chance that in the bell curve of her thoughts, there were some more extreme thoughts that she had around the lines of, I'm just not attracted to him. I don't think this is going to work. You could imagine her thinking those thoughts or telling a friend over text or something. And she didn't say those things, maybe. I don't know. But whereas Cole and Bartice will just say, they'll say everything. They'll just say whatever's on that bell curve. And then that really hurts the other person. And then there's fighting, and then there's alienation. And then it just goes down a road of negativity. And then neither one wants to be with the other person. Or it leads to complications that lead to at least one person not wanting to be in the relationship. Whereas for Raven and SK, she kind of was just like, well, let's wait and see. There's no sense in saying those things. I'll just slow down, and then things could grow for them. I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine. I mean, I guess I want to fill in the gaps because I think it might help all of us to think about our own lives. If you're dating, you might want to think about, this is important actually, to think about how you interpret your reactivity as you're starting to date. Like a classic example is people will go on a first date and there's a lot of potential markers of a good match, a good fit. But then there's that one thing that you saw, like, well, like this is, it's not dating, but it's, when people meet, like someone emailed into me as a client, they had seen a therapist and they emailed in and they said that the therapist, as the client was getting up to leave the first session, the therapist grabbed her coat and said, oh, let me help you with your coat, or something like that. I can't remember if that was it or something along those lines. And the client had left the session and was really trying to figure that out. Like, why did she hold my coat for me? Was she trying to test me? A lot of injection of ideas, and emailed in. And of course, I can't know why the therapist did that, but me and Bob and I were saying, well, we don't know what the motivation of the therapist was, but in all likelihood, the therapist was just helping you with your coat. That's all that it was. It wouldn't be normal for a therapist to test a client like that, one. And two, if they were to test a client, they wouldn't do it that way. And three, if they did test a client, ethically, you got to tell your client you're testing them. You can't just manipulate a client into a test that they didn't consent to, right? Are there like informal tests or assessment bits that a therapist might do? Yeah. But anyway, so that's something to think about, right? Like, okay, there's on the bell curve of reactivity, there's a side of me that says, that's a huge red flag that I dated this person and this thing happened. But there's all these other good things. And so sometimes it's good to just slow down. Just be like, well, let's wait and see. I don't need to make a decision right now, and let's see what happens. Sometimes relationships will start like that, and 25 years later, they're still happily married because they didn't take any rash decision. They didn't make any rash decisions. Having said that, if you don't want to date someone, you don't have to date someone, right? Anyway, but good for SK and Raven. That's nice.
You're missing him and vice versa?
Our communication, I think I can speak for both of us. We've never been on this level in any other relationship. Every time I feel like we reach a new level, and nothing's perfect, but we've grown so much from this experiment, first of all.
Yeah, I think I remember thinking this before in previous seasons where you're kind of in a foxhole together in that it's a really unique experience and only you and your partner know what you went through. It's specific, as a cast member among the other cast, but also just your own world that you lived in the pods, and then afterwards, you really go through. Sometimes I think that's one of the reasons why we go through engagement parties, engagements, and weddings, and all the accoutrement that comes along with a wedding, because you really bond. You go through something. It's stressful to get married and to plan for a wedding, and you're in it together, right? And so I wonder if for the two of them, that really helped overcome both of their tendencies towards being reserved, particularly for Raven. But another element of this that I'm just realizing is that it's long distance, the relationship, which I think might help a little bit, because I think Raven has some worries about being invaded. It just kind of seems that way. She wants people to be a little bit at a distance until she can trust them, right? So maybe for her, it helps a little bit that he's not in town all the time, and it makes the heart grow over time for the two of them. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. But it sounds like, they legit have feelings for each other, which is, it's nice to know. Because, you watch the show and you hope that people find love, and it looks like Raven and SK might have. I mean, who knows if it'll last forever or if they'll ever get married, but it's just, even if you just date someone, here's another little thing, is we tend to privilege. So let's say SK and Raven break up tomorrow. People will be like, oh, well, that was a disaster. That was a complete waste of time. You hear those kinds of phrases. And I don't think that's true. I mean, it depends on your goals in life, I suppose. If you're on some sort of timeline biologically, to have kids, then yeah, it could be considered a waste of time. But you don't know what the universe has for you and why things are happening. And there's a lot of ways of seeing it, right? You could see it that it was wonderful for the time that it was wonderful, and then it became kind of bad, and then we broke up. And I'm really glad I went through it. And, I met someone, or I had some experiences. I learned some things about myself. For a time, there was a good connection and exploration. So, I'm glad for them, is my point, regardless of what happens in the future.
Nancy and Raven. We have video, of course. Let's take a look.
Oh no.
Nancy is like that person, like, you see in Walmart from high school and you're like, like, hey. But also, like, I might act like I'm busy and we don't have to talk.
Yikes. Well, what does she mean by that? Is she just saying that she's shy, or is she judging Nancy and saying that Nancy's below her? Yikes. I don't know. Let's see what Raven says here.
Playful, but also she's a little negative. Like, I can't. I'm done. Honestly, I was kind of surprised that she was on the top of your list.
It makes sense that Nancy would have some impulse to convince her, person, Bartice, her fiance, that Nancy is a better catch than Raven is. Or they're just having conversations. You just got to know that they all will gossip about each other, but they're being filmed right now, so Nancy knows that. Interesting that they would show this. Are they hoping that Nancy and Raven are going to hate each other?
And I was like, Raven? Like, I was really taken aback because we're very different. If homegirl shoots her shot with Bartice, then I'm gonna let Bartice figure that out.
Yeah, and a part of this is, imagine you fall in love with someone and you are legit in love and you're in the pods and you have this sensory deprivation experience and you're just like, I've never felt this way before. That's another element I don't think I've talked about, at least with this season, is that we have a cognitive bias that is novelty means better. And so, not always, of course, but often. Another cognitive bias we have is if we feel better in relation to where we were, we will feel the difference, not necessarily where we're at in terms of satisfaction or comfort. For example, if and there are charismatic leaders who will use this to their advantage, cult leaders as well, religious leaders sometimes. They will put you in a situation where you're very uncomfortable. Think about Teal Swan, and you can think of what you want to her, and I've made a bunch of episodes about, not a bunch, but some about her. And one of the things we saw in the documentary, and there were some problems with that documentary, that it was deceptive in this scene, but from my understanding, what was happening is they were putting people in the water, and it was uncomfortable. They were struggling to breathe or something. I can't remember. Anyway. So charismatic leaders will use this as well, that they will put you in a situation where it's very uncomfortable, and then they will remove you the uncomfortableness from that situation. And because you feel better, you'll feel euphoric. Whereas if you just actually looked at the situation, you've returned to baseline. You were at baseline, you became uncomfortable, and now you're back to baseline. But because you've moved forward in comfort, or you've risen in your comfort level, it feels, in relative to where you were before, you feel liberated and wonderful and that sort of thing. So it's possible that in the pods that you're, not able to connect with anyone, you're not able to talk to anyone, you're uncomfortable, you don't know any of these people, and then you connect with one person. They're your safety, right? They're like, oh my God, I feel like this person's on my side. I feel safe. I feel heard. I feel entertained. It would potentially really elevate the love and the feeling and the vibe and the euphoria and the motivation and the conclusions you would come to. It's like, man, I've never felt this way before. It's possible because you're in a really awful situation and the person in the other pod is bringing you back up to baseline to some extent. Now, one could argue that sensory deprivation and the temporary nature of that is facilitative of the two of you actually bonding and helping push past the normal hang-ups that people have when about bonding, that it pushes past their trust issues or pushes past their hesitations, just like, hey, let's take the leap, and bonds the two individuals, and then that solidifies the relationship. Or it could give those people who might not be a great match this false sense of connection, right? And I think we've seen that as well, where they seem like they'll often talk about, oh, we were so in love in the pods and da-da-da-da. And it's just like, really? You two were in love in the pods? Because after the pods, you don't seem to be a compatible match at all. So I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
Music they added in.
It gets you in it.
Drama.
Such a little beat.
What?
Another example of this, by the way, I've never taken it, so I don't know, but from reports and research, ayahuasca can have a euphoric feeling, but it also is reported to have a lot of discomfort, a lot of nausea, a lot of difficulty. And then or hot yoga or sweat lodges, those kinds of things. I'm not saying they're worthless. I'm not saying it's trickery. I'm just saying it's possible that an element of people's enjoyment of those things has to do with discomfort. So you're at baseline, you make yourself uncomfortable, and then as you emerge out of that discomfort, you have euphoria, because it's hard to get baseline and then euphoric, right? It's hard to go from baseline, but you can make yourself uncomfortable. And then another example of this that's maybe more relatable is when you have water in your ear and you're walking around and you can't hear very well, and then all of a sudden the water comes out and suddenly you can hear. It's euphoric, but you're being brought back to baseline. You're just hearing normally. And when you're hearing normally for a few months, you don't really take note of it because it's baseline, it's normal. But if you have deprivation and then you're given it back, then, oh my God, my life is so great right now. So I wonder if the pod experience capitalizes on that bias.
It was like, what? So I think it was just people dating people that were dating.
Of course, it's just in the heat of the moment, emotions, like I said, like
imagine you've fallen in love with someone and the person that you live with on your side of the pod wall is also in love with the person you're in love with is giving that person attention. That would cause some upset feelings, right? So at the very least, it's going to bias you against like, really, her? What? And then you might start gathering some data to not like that person, to feel threatened by that person. Having said that, I feel like they seemingly handle it pretty well. Think about Jessica and Amber, how that blew up. But the fact that the rest of them seem to deal with it, pretty okay, is a testament to their differentiation and their values, which is good.
We all really got close. I think on the men's side, I'm going to speak a little bit for the men. For me, one of the biggest things I'm taking away from this experience is for the very first time, I was in an environment with 14 other guys where it was actually absolutely okay to talk about your feelings. And guys don't always do that every day. So
I was a little worried about what SK was going to say. I thought he was going to be like, I'll speak for the guys. There's a lot of backstabbing about it's like, but he is saying, yeah, and we observed some scenes like that where the men could cry and that was okay, and have their feelings and that was okay. And so, it's good to hear. And it's good to hear SK highlight that. People in my field and in other fields of academia and clinical work have been advocating for decades for toxic masculinity to go away. Also for everyone to be able to feel okay, to have their feelings, to allow everyone to be vulnerable, to destigmatize vulnerability and sadness and crying and pain and grief. And I think all of us, and there are thousands, millions of us around the world in various different fields, psychology, social psychology, medicine, who have worked really hard, and we're seeing the rewards. Education, another discipline. So I think it's a testament to research, to advocacy, to education, to getting the word out, to treatment. These things don't happen in a vacuum. The movements of accepting one's vulnerability, to give everyone, particularly men, but everyone, the ability to cry and to ask for help is, it's been a movement we've been on. We have a long way to go, but I don't know. I feel in my old age, I've seen things change, and I want to tell people who are younger, if you see something that is bothersome in culture, in politics, in the environment, you can change things. It just takes a long time, and it takes a group effort. It takes everyone, various different angles of it: research, education, treatment, advocacy, lobbying, speaking out, Twitter, Facebook, talking to your friends, talking to your colleagues, raising awareness. If everyone does that as a collective, we can change the world. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.